Nice to meet everybody. As he said, I'm Chad Wathington. I'm Chief Strategy Officer for Thoughtworks. And what we wanted to do today is actually bridge the gap by two folks from separate roles having a conversation about some of the issues that we face and ways that we've seen in our experience, both from a strategy and product and from an engineering perspective, to bridge those gaps. So we thought it'd be more interesting than just one person talking about, some tips and tricks. And so hopefully it makes some sense to see how we've bridged some of the gaps and misalignment in the past. So Kathleen, can you share an example of how misalignment between technology strategy and business strategy has led to challenges, has played out negatively sometimes in your experience?
Yeah, so we'll try to start out with the what not to do. What is the typical scenario? So Chad here, as you know, amazing strategic thinker, but also has background in product, and I've got my background in software engineering. So we'll play out some personas here where I'm thinking as the engineering leader, and he's my product partner. Okay, so in this example, Chad has got this great feature that the business has decided they want to implement, and he's coming to me as the engineering manager and saying, okay, hey, Kathleen, we're going to build this feature. I've got the Jira Epic. It's all written up. And so the temptation can be I look at that Epic and I start asking a lot of how questions, we need to build this application and it needs to have 6 features and 3 buttons and use up this much of the page. And we get right into the nitty gritty. And he's got a picture that is formed in his mind, and I have a picture that's forming in my mind. And then we separate, and off I go with my engineers, and we work for, I don't know how many sprints, maybe several sprints. And then I come back, and I say, hey, Chad, so excited. We have been working so incredibly hard, and we have our code in QA, and we're ready to show it to you. And we go, ta-da! And Chad looks at it, and he's like,
it's not what I was thinking.
This is nothing like what Chad had in his mind picture, right? So this has played out a bunch of times. I've been, on both on the engineering side of this conversation where I thought I was doing such a good job, and we were doing such an earnest job to try to build the thing, right, that we were told to build. But I think sometimes that's kind of an order-taking mindset where you're like, I don't know. They're the business people. I'm the engineer. They figure out what to build, and I just build it. But really, it's so important to get to a whole lot more why. So, the conversation we should have had is, why are we building it? What are the business drivers? What is this whole feature for? And it's probably there's kind of a finite set of reasons you build things. You're driving revenue. You're reducing your operational expenses. You want new customers. You want to retain customers. You want satisfied customers. There's some metric in there, and I, as an engineering leader, should be asking what that is and telling my teams what it is. That will inform a lot better design. And then what we do at Capital One to enhance this experience, and in fact, just the other day, we did one of these on my team. We do a lot of proof of concept work. So basically, we're going to build the system. We have the design. We do a very quick prototype, and then we were building a business process automation in AWS step functions. But until we sat down with the team and the product leaders and just passed hard-coded stuff through the system, we didn't really know, how are we going to maintain this thing? What's going to be the test automation plan? That's where all the juice comes out. That was a really interesting demo and conversation, and it's so early that if it turns out that our mind pictures are not the same, we can fix it, we can pivot, we can build something a little differently. So those early proof of concepts and demos have been really important for our team to stay in line with the vision and the product as it's evolving and moving along, and just making sure our pictures in our minds match. All right, so Chad, can you walk us through, you have a particular framework. Can you walk us through your approach to building a technology strategy that aligns with the business goals?
Yep.
And some of the key considerations and trade-offs that you make when you're determining which technologies should be invested in.
Yeah. So first of all, strategy is one of these words with a lot of semantic diffusion. A lot of people mean all kinds of things when they say strategy, so I always bottom line what I mean by it. And strategy is the purposeful and planned investment of resources in advance to affect a specific outcome. So that's a lot of words, but I'm going to do something today on purpose to affect something specific tomorrow. And I'm going to plan to do it, and I'm going to invest real money to do it, right? And so businesses have strategies in all kinds of ways, right? The business strategy, the tech strategy. How do you start to align those things is where people kind of drift into sort of mysticism. Strategy is this vague word, and there's strategy people doing strategy things, but actually it's not that hard. So the first thing I recommend that people do is ground themselves in some simple things of strategy. There's a great book called Playing to Win, and it's about how to communicate about strategy. So it asks some key questions. What's your winning aspiration? Where do you play? How do you want to win? It's great not only for you, but to get other people to read it. I've used it on teams before to ground how we talk about strategy. Oh, what are our where to play choices, etc. The second thing, and Kathleen mentioned this earlier, is that like strategy has kind of bounded questions. It's not like, oh, there's some vague stuff. If you're trying to expand your business by growing customers, well, that's kind of a well-known space. So there's a customer segmentation probably, and then what do we know about customers? So I always recommend that engineering leaders start to ask these questions. One of my colleagues did a blog post on Mountain Fowler's blog talking about integrating technology and business strategy, where she created a resource of these questions. So, hey, your business is trying to improve customer sat. Here are the questions to go ask, because it's not some vague like universe of all the things. There's 5 or 3 key questions. You should know what they are. After you've done that, then I think it's about a scan. It's a scan about your capabilities, the capabilities that you might need to build, the roadmap, and then all the technologies that could play into that. And so I'll talk a little bit more later about capabilities. But the key thing is once you've done the scan, you kind of know what you're working with. It's not amalgamous, it's not weird. It's like, okay, we have these capabilities and our business is trying to do X. How do I bring those to bear? And how do I keep a scan for new technologies that can help us do the next thing that we know might be coming down the road? Often I see that people tend to think in roadmaps and features, when I try to say with business strategy, you want to think in probabilities. And I don't like to use military analogies too much in talking about strategy because it's kind of hackneyed. But if you think about a general building a cavalry, they don't say, oh, well, tomorrow I'm going to have a war and the cavalry is going to need to be in X place. They've built the cavalry way before that, and now they're trying to deploy the pieces at the point of a battle. So next question for you. How do you ensure that your engineering team is aware and aligned to the strategy, the business strategy that's overall? And so what processes, what ways have you thought about it to align everybody and make sure people are aware?
So the big key for me, the learning that has made itself apparent over and over, is kind of an early inclusion and a co-creation mindset. So let me tell you what I mean. And again, Chad here, he's going to be my product partner. I'm the tech partner. Our product partners are getting increasingly technical. So they know a lot about technology. And so it happens that Chad here goes off and, is really thinking about this thing they need to build for the business. And he's lying awake at night and he's thinking about it in the shower. And he's like thinking about the solution. And so what can happen is Chad comes to me and he's been thinking for like a month and he goes, hey, Kathleen, ta-da, like this is what I want you to build.
I need big table.
What's that?
I need big table.
Yeah, I want big table.
Random
right?
technical implementation.
I've looked at all the different technologies, and this is how I think we can solve it, and here's the system. And this has literally happened to me where my product partner came with this complicated diagram, an architecture diagram, and said, here, this is what we need. And I was like, wow, that's great.
Thank you.
But the problem is now it puts us in this kind of an adversarial situation, because I'm going to inspect this and go, now I have a lot of hard questions. Why big table? Are you doing transactional data, or like, do you need to query this data? Like, what are you trying to build? And it puts me in the position of saying no. Like, that's not what I would do, or no, you shouldn't do it this way, right? And so now he's feeling shot down and rejected, and I'm feeling kind of bad about the whole thing.
Yeah.
And it also means Chad has probably done a lot of thinking about like all these different like he probably made all kinds of trade-offs along the way to the big reveal. But I don't know what those were. So now I'm going to go, well, did you consider BigQuery? And did you consider this? And he's going to go, yeah, of course I did. Right? And that's a frustrating experience. So how do you solve it? You got to co-create. Like if you really want buy-in from other people, inviting them in early from the beginning, let's all be together to talk about what are we trying to build? What are the requirements? What are the business drivers? And let's go through the process together, at least have a way to tap into the process as it goes along. So one way we do this in my group is we use things like RAID logs, where you're tracking, the decisions as you're making them, and in a way that's transparent to everybody, that everybody can have a say. So like, here are the risks, here are the assumptions, here are the issues, here are the dependencies. Those assumptions that you make are really important. And if we don't all agree on those assumptions, we're probably going to diverge. So that's a lot of the types of tools and things that we try to co-create early, try to be part of that requirements gathering process together. Now, you had a great example that you wanted to share around this.
So I literally did the joke. I used to run our product division, and me and the head of product came up with some features, and it was around a complex area in the application with like hierarchies and dependencies. And so we sat in a room for about a week coming up with how it should work, ruling out things, and recording ourselves so that we could show it to other people. Because we cared about the communication, so we recorded all these videos. We tried to remind ourselves of why we came up with certain solutions to problems, and then we unveiled it to everybody like bang, and everyone looked at us like, yeah, we're not sure we believe that. So the team went and redid everything that we did for 2 weeks to prove that we were right. And we're like, no, that's not going to work. Already been there, done that. No, that's not going to work. Already been there, done that. And if we had just had one person from the team in our crazy brainstorming with the videos, we would have forestalled all of that and saved 2 weeks. So it's definitely real. Co-creation, communication is not enough. You got to have people in there with you.
And one other way we do this is like we have product owners that sit on the teams with the engineers, right? Like they're really close together, right? So you have that product and tech connection. Okay, can you share an example of a successful technology initiative that drove business outcomes and how your team measured success and what lessons you learned through that experience?
Yeah. So we have a client, I guess most people in the room probably know Sonic Drive-In, the quick service restaurant. So several years ago, Sonic was trying to update its what it called its integrated customer experience. And so the technology team knew that they had to move faster. So they said, hey, okay, we should improve our tech estate, and maybe we should build a developer platform. And that makes sense. Yeah, let's build a developer platform. But often people build capabilities and build platforms without connection to real business value. And so what they did well was say, okay, what can we build first that'll prove this whole thing out? And so I'm going to take a very seemingly mundane example, but show how it really was powerful. They said, okay, the monolith that we currently have has the ability to take orders. But now we're going to pull that out and we're going to put ordering on the platform. And ordering on the platform, right, you can still order at the kiosk. You can now maybe order on your mobile phone. You can now order and get delivery. That's cool. Those are basic things. But the cool thing that it allowed them to do was say, how can we transform ordering at a drive-up? And they came up with, hey, let's do order ahead. So imagine that I'm going to go through the drive-up experience, but instead of punching things in at the kiosk, 15 minutes before I leave, I punch it in my mobile phone and I drive up to the drive-in and I get hot food with somebody on the roller skates really fast. And it's the idea of thinking of the right kind of capability, connecting it to business value, doing that incrementally, and then driving. So when you talk about metrics, it's the right metric is the right thing that drives the business value that you can measure. So it's like, hey, let's choose to do this thing that we can demonstrate so many times. And it's when we were preparing for this, I talk about it a lot. I joke with people that if you build capabilities and there's never an outcome, you get fired. And so it's true that like sometimes people will spend $20 million building out capabilities that they might use in the future, and it's never tied to a business outcome. So how do you do that well? How do you cut it? How do you slice? I'll talk a little bit about business capabilities and domain-driven design later, but doing that well is really important. So let's see. How do you, given all this landscape, prioritize the investments in technology, considering that you have short-term needs, you have problems, you have long-term architecture, you've got roadmaps and people asking you for stuff. How do you think about the prioritization process?
Yeah. So actually, I was sitting in room 2 earlier, talking in the front row with the person sitting next to me, and we were talking a little bit about OKRs, and how should you measure those, and that you should have metrics. It was the metrics talk, and he said, well, what about when there's just a feature, like your KR is a feature that you're supposed to deliver? And I'm like, no. There's still a business driver. You need to know what is the business driver. Yeah, but that might not come for a long time. So anyway, it ties into this conversation. So you're talking about strategy, which is, what is the destination? Where are you trying to get to? From a technical perspective, what we do is, we try to have our 3-year architectural design. And so actually, I started at Capital One 2 years ago. And in my org, the 2 domains that I own needed to go on that journey of building our whole architectural plan. And we did that, which was awesome and fascinating. And it's, a combination of like, are we building on internal platforms or are we building things? It's build versus buy, the whole thing, right? But once we have that kind of long term, it's not like we think that will never change. It might, but it gives us something to plan backwards from. And that's strategy, right? Like, where you want to go and then you plan backwards. So it's important to have the big picture, but then it's also important to deliver small use cases. So in this conversation, he said, well, what if it takes like a really long time to build the feature? I'm like, well, what we do is we're always looking for what is that thin use case that will touch a bunch of the functionality that we need in this end-to-end process. Not everything, but like enough of it that we can get something out into production, into market, and start collecting those metrics, right? And then if you're on the right track, is it going to build business value? Because what we do instead, a lot of times as engineers, we're like, imagine the machine and all the features you want it to have, and then you go off for a really long time and you build the whole machine, everything you could ever dream it could do. Unfortunately, a lot of those things will go unused. So starting with those thin MVPs has been a really key strategy, but then always tacking back to like, okay, what's the long term? And are we tracking to that as we're getting those wins and we're developing metrics and understanding the value as we're going along in the short term?
Yeah. And that's super critical. We at ThoughtWorks, we talk about this idea of the thin slice. If you're taking big chunks and hoping for value to be delivered, you're taking risk. And so smaller bites of risk done often really makes sense.
Yeah. Okay, so Chad, can you share an example of how a team can use domain-driven design? So you mentioned that earlier. This is the moment to hear about it.
Yeah.
Or bounded contexts to define business capabilities. And then how do you ensure that these concepts are aligned with that business strategy?
Yeah. So I said before that a lot of times you want to think about capabilities as probabilities, thinking about the things that are likely to be used, not just a linear roadmap and not just build all the things that I could ever want. So you're trying to bridge the difference, right? So I was sitting with a CTO of a bank, and he's like, I need all the capabilities. And I was like, well, what do you mean? He's like, I'm going to hire an army of data scientists. And I'm like, okay, cool. He's like, I'm going to hire a bunch of back-end people, and I'm going to hire mobile, and we're going to just knock out all these new businesses that the main business is trying to drive. And I said, okay, but what if we invert that a little bit? What if we say, you're a bank with a consumer loan operation, and you're trying to figure out new ways to loan people money. So you could think about the capabilities in that direction. So the loaning, there's origination, there's pricing, there's underwriting. There's all these areas that you can define and that don't have a lot of overlap. And once you do that, you can say, now I'm building a platform to build the next new business line area. So I know how to do origination. I know how to do underwriting over and over and over again. And so then your army of data scientists, which I don't think you should have an army of data scientists, but you can deploy those folks logically based against what they really need to do. Oh, I need to do pricing now. Cool. The data scientists are working on pricing. Oh, I need to build a new like front end point of sale bit for, taking people in. Okay, cool. That's what the mobile crew is working on. You've got more of a maximized surface area to say, these are the probabilities of reuse. These are the probabilities of things that we can build the business on. And so this particular company ended up doing it the way I suggested, and they built 4 new business lines. That was successful, as opposed to getting an army of data scientists. And I said, I'm not kidding. I was like, if you hire that army, those people will be sitting there twiddling their thumbs while you figure out what to do with them. So don't do that. Figure this out first. And I think it works out better. So before we get to questions, one last question for you. What advice would you give other technical leaders who are trying to get into this and better align their teams with business or strategy? Are there like best practices, things that you've done, tips and tricks that you think are really valuable for folks?
Yeah, so when I started at Capital One, I was coming from Twitter. So I was not coming from a fintech or with a finance background. I was coming with engineering experience. So from the beginning, I knew, okay, this is my opportunity to learn more about finance. Capital One has incredible business minds and strategists, some of the best I've ever worked with. So it's been fascinating to get to go along that learning journey. And so I personally think it's very important to invest in things like, actually, yesterday there was a talk about finance. I don't know if anybody here went to it, but I've had 2 different people today tell me it was the best talk from yesterday, because it was helping people understand company valuations and what do some of these finance terms mean. It's really good if you work for a public company to listen to your earnings calls. Like, what is driving the business that's informing the technology that you're going to build? So I do things like I make sure I attend our monthly business reports, where they are laying out these charts with finance terms I have had to learn and acronyms I've never seen before. But, it's been worth the investment to try to learn and figure that out as I go along, so that I can be a better partner. I can ask better questions. We have executive credit training, so I was able to go to that. So interesting to see, how do credit card companies think about risk? How do they model that? Fascinating stuff. Other things I've done, because my area has a customer service aspect and because agents use our tools, I went to the call center in Colombia and did this side by side, watching the agent use our tools and go, oh, wow. I was like, oh my gosh, the screen is small. The real estate of the tool is not what we think it is. And so there's some messages that might be below the fold. That's something I can take back to our engineers. Listening to calls just to understand our customers, their needs. So I think as engineers, sometimes we can get so about the tech and kind of nerd out on how cool our tech is. But knowing what your business is about and why you're building what you're building is absolutely critical. It will make you a better leader. It's the way to become an executive, a higher level leader, is to really start to understand the business. So those are some things I've done to try to just make sure I can be the best tech partner that I can be.
Cool. All right. I think now it's time for open it up for questions. We were told about 25 minutes of talking, and
yeah, I think we have plenty of time for questions, so I'll hand around the mic for anybody. Just raise your hand.
Yeah, so how do you define value or point to outcomes from deeply technical initiatives? Say it's a big tech debt cleanup or re-architecture. Any tips on how you would do that?
Yeah, so when I was at Twitter, the last part of my time there, I was working on infrastructure automation. So that's that very deeply technical work that we were doing, and our customers were not the end customer so much as they were other developers or other teams, like the compute team, the network team, storage team, et cetera. So, and it's great that you asked that, because every cycle, when I would have managers come up with the OKRs, you just sort of default to this, like, my key result is delivering a thing, or my key result is, so we kept trying to track back. It's probably one of this very short list of things. It's driving revenue, or most of the time it was an OpEx. It was either reducing, running the engine, keeping the lights on, whatever acronym you use for that. So can we actually reduce the number of manual toil hours that people are experiencing? Can we reduce the number of service tickets or automate the service? We had proxy issues. We were able to automate our way out of dealing with those tickets manually. So you can quantify either by number of engineers or hours that are being saved, right? Or you can quantify it by dollars. You could calculate how much a developer costs per month, and then say, this is the dollar value of the work if we don't have those people doing those tasks anymore. So I try to think of those kinds of things. Does that answer the question? Yeah.
The one thing I add is that a lot of times, if you can ground people in lean thinking or some of the DORA metrics, you can make an argument about, hey, cycle time. And everyone believes cycle time is important, so we'll improve that. And then you don't have to necessarily go all the way down. But I think to Kathleen's point, OpEx and SG&A or spend is very concrete for people to say I'm spending X and then I'm doing Y. But if you can get your business to not always go there and understand some of the better things around DX and some of the things we're talking about here, then you have to do less work to convince folks to go all the way.
So one thing I've been thinking about and kind of it's weird having this on, trying to work through is you have our CTO says, well, our teams have ownership, right? But we only have ownership up until the point to where the product team tells us what to do. So our team is a high performing team. We put out work. We have good, within the team, there's trust. The trust between engineering and product is a little low. And we're working to try to improve that. But my team is well, these are some things that we can deliver and build and add to our stack and add for customers. And then the PO who is integrated in the team, the pushback is, well, let me go talk to so-and-so. And it's almost well, we have ownership, but we really don't have ownership because we can't produce or build new features. How do you deal with that?
Should I go first? Or I can? Yeah. So I think one, from a product management discipline, your POs need to change a little bit. But I think the key thing is that you're trying to balance all the time what the business needs are, feasibility, what the technical needs are, and how does it come together in a way that the business can pay for and make money off of, right? And so I think sometimes people get really focused on roadmap-driven thinking. There's a feature, and then therefore this needs to be done, and then it's almost like an assembly line. And so I think that's not great product discipline, but to help you in the context of how to get over that is, I think I always say cadence over prioritization. So certain things need to be prioritized at certain times. So if you're very linear, again, you build this super duper long roadmap, that's usually gets out of date, is usually bad. But what you want to do is say, we're going to focus on these areas now. And then these other things that we didn't care about, we're going to focus on them later and get into a good cadence. Because once you're in a good cadence, people will believe, and belief is the key thing, that you'll circle back to the other stuff. If nobody believes that you'll get to this customer segment over there, nobody believes in engineering that you'll get to this technical debt, then it's all a game. Then it's I see you, I'm never going to do that. But if you establish the trust that we will get back to this, we will build this, we'll come back, then it lowers the stakes.
Yeah, these are great questions, by the way, both questions. So this, I feel like there's two aspects of it. One is when we have technical initiatives that our teams are telling us we should chase, and we want to get buy-in from product on those things, framing up the impact is just a thing that we struggle to do as engineers. Like, how do I explain in a business way why this matters? Like, it's either, I don't know, you could be performance tuning, like maybe something like really down in the technical weeds, but there's always a way to frame what is the business going to get back. And so that's all great if you can try to frame it like, here's the advantage to the business. But then also we forget over and over, and it breaks trust, to then report back on the value that we gained. Like, we are so excited about the work and the effort and the technical coolness of the solution. Like, that's what we want to tell. That's the story we think is cool. But our product partners are like, are you giving me back more capacity? Are you helping me ship faster? Can I get my next product out? Like, which one of these things? That's what I care about. So, like, how can I frame this in a way the product cares about? And how can I remember when we deliver the thing, and it's kind of a pain in the neck, calculate the return. Like, this is how many engineers no longer have to do that toil because we invested in that tech debt or we invested in that technical thing. It's really hard to keep closing the loop on that. So I don't know if that resonates, but you build trust when you always close that loop. And then product goes, oh, when they tell me we need to do a thing, I get something back from it. And so now I believe you when you tell me it's important. The specific example I'll give is trying to get more test automation. So we want end-to-end test automation. And so how do you convince product people about test automation? You have to frame it in, well, like these are the many, many, many hours we spend manually setting up our integration tests or manually doing all these activities. And when we get this all automated, which is going to be a really big investment, we're going to get that back. And then you actually can get to a point where you're even changing your estimate. So now, instead of saying, this is my estimate, 4 engineers to build the feature, and then 2 engineers later to do the test automation, you're like, no, it's 6 engineers to build the feature, which includes the quality, which includes the test automation, which includes the whole thing. So a lot of it is that. And so we've gotten I've gotten, our product partners on board and even champions for test automation. Can you believe it? It can happen. I'm here to say it's possible.
For someone who wasn't here for this talk, how would you sell your product partner on co-creating and aligning early in a process, and even vice versa? How would you sell your engineering partner on aligning early in a process if they didn't hear this talk and they are kind of set in their ways?
It takes time, when I had this particular challenge, I had to keep going to my product partner and saying, like, first of all, I had to appreciate the thinking they were doing in the shower on the weekend for a month straight. Like, this person was so passionate about the business and the customers. They desperately wanted to solve the problem. But then I kind of explained, like, this is the position you put us in, kind of the way I did with you all. Like, if you give us the full solution, like, we can't contribute to all of the questions along the way that validate whether those are the right tools to do the job. And when you invite us early, right, you're going to get us on board. We're going to get to be involved. We get to, be part of the requirements, questions, and all of that. And we're just going to work so much more seamlessly. Otherwise, you're just forever going to be in a convincing each other forever. Like, I go off, I make my solution, and then I try to convince product that I'm right. Or same thing, product does their thing, and then they try to convince me. Like, why are we doing it like that? Why don't we just build it together, and then we can just skip the whole convincing thing? And it's not about being right.
I also think that in my experience, when the co-creation goes well, if you can get it to happen the first time, then people go, oh, okay, I see. That was actually kind of fun. And to, at ThoughtWorks, we used to pair when most companies said, oh, pairing's not great. But I would pair with developers because I was technical and actually implement a feature. And then I'm refactoring things. I'm taking the keyboard and I'm actually coding even though I'm not a developer. And that actually was helpful to me in saying, oh, okay, that's a problem. And vice versa. If I could make it real that the feature that we were trying to do was valuable and not just something that I put on a piece of paper and said, we got to do this, then it was a lot better. So it's almost as if you get the momentum and can convince somebody to do it a few times, like, hey, I know you don't want to do this, but let's try it. And then have that moment where you're looking at each other like, yeah, then you can do it the next time and the next time. And so I found that really getting that rapport right is critical.
I actually have a question.
Yeah.
So we recently went through and did a business capabilities mapping between head of product and head of engineering.
Right.
And when we started it off, the head of product was really adamant about needing a roadmap before we could actually define capabilities. And engineering was adamant about needing to understand like what our capabilities were before that, like transaction management, account management, onboarding, enterprise risk, that kind of stuff. What comes first, the chicken or the egg? Like,
So I actually think it's that neither comes first, that it should be a bit of both. And what I was saying before about probability, a good roadmap is a good guess, right? But also some of these things are emergent. And if you're too committed to like, oh, we're going to do this, you're going to make a mistake because you didn't consider like, oh, actually, that's not one thing, it's two things really. And now you've not done the work to really understand it. So I think from a tech perspective, doing a bit of a scan, understanding the bits, having a guess at a roadmap that's not too rigid, and then tacking back and forth is the right kind of a yin and yang to it. That's how I would approach it.
Yeah, I think it also kind of depends on whether you have a specific timeline or deadline or not, right? Sometimes you do and sometimes you don't. So where we have right now a project that there is a deliverable we must hit by a date, that was actually the exercise of, okay, this is the thin slice of what we're going to put together to hit that date. But the bigger architecture we will eventually build is not, the whole rest of it isn't necessarily on a time-bound phased program, because it's just this one partner that we have to deliver. It's kind of like, if you're in a startup and you've got to like deliver the thing for the customer to get the funding, right? Like, okay, then you're probably going to start with a date.
Right.
But lots of other times it's more like you want to have user growth. And so you're going to build a new feature in hopes of getting user growth. And that might not have a date really. It's just like as fast as you can. So then I think you're talking about what are the essential capabilities and starting from there. So.
And one interesting point that made me think, if you decide that you have to be linear and there's a date, you might not get reuse. That might not be the right thing. And that's okay. If everybody's okay with it, it's cool and eyes wide open. It's the problem where you assume that then, hey, yeah, we're going to build this platform capability and then you only use it once, and that was a waste of time. So, yeah, that's a very good point. If there's a date, you got to hit the date.
Thanks for the talk. Kathleen, I think you talked a bit about engineering leaders attending MBRs, monthly business reviews, for getting context. What, in your mind, is the active role an engineering leader can play in those rooms, those discussions? And two, do you think there is a concept of shared ownership of those business metrics across product and engineering?
I think as I've attended more MBRs and, the business the domain I'm in is super, super complex and interesting. And so I would not have a lot to contribute to the business conversation the first few times I go to that monthly business report, because it's just the charts are new, the competitive set is new, right? I'm a learner. It took several runs where it's also sort of it's a visual language. Like getting to know it's like dashboards, right? Like the dashboard, when you first look at it, doesn't look like anything. And then once you've seen that dashboard every day or every month, you start to go, oh, that line should be going up and now it's going down. Or, then you can start to have insights and start to understand what this stuff means. So I would say to be quiet and taking a lot in and not interrupting the flow of a large business meeting where like all the business stakeholders like already know what everyone's talking about. But later on, I think I have been able to ask intelligent questions about like, hey, I'm trying to think of a good example that I can give, that we had a particular type of vendor interaction where we don't have contracts with those vendors, but we need to influence them to do a thing. And I was like, hey, I have an idea. What if we use this interstitial and, like a terms and conditions page? And like they ended up saying, oh, that's a great idea. It would like solved a business problem. So it just took time for me investing in understanding the business to now start to piece together technology ideas that I could provide. What was the second question? I can't remember the second part.
It was co-ownership of business metrics.
Exactly.
Co-ownership of business metrics. Let's see. You want to answer the first part and I'll be thinking about that, or did you have any else thing you wanted to add?
No, I
No, okay.
actually liked your first.
All right.
So I'll say something on the co-ownership. I think with metrics we can be too myopic about like moving the needle, and the question becomes, what's the point of the metric? And then therefore, if it should be co-owned or not is based on if you can move it. So if technology can move the metric, then I think it's something to be like, hey, let's do this together, and let's, we can show that we can move that metric. And then the technology team should have some influence over that. I think because I'm a bit of a business metric skeptic, in that I think many businesses have too many metrics. When it's just like pages of different, business things that people are trying to drive, I would be careful about actually wanting to co-own the ones that you don't feel like you have direct influence on. I always use the joke of like, it's easy when the metric is user signups, and that's how Lean Startup came from. Very easy, like there's a tie, oh, we want people to sign up, cool. But it's very different when you're like 3 chains down the road of your level of influence to a metric. And I would be, wary of signing up for ownership of those.
I think the only thing I would add to this co-ownership idea, at Capital One, every launch message that's going out is recognizing a huge cross-functional group of people. So there is a high sense of co-ownership of the delivery of the thing or the moving of the metric, because it's going to have engineering, it's going to have product, it's going to have business, it's going to have our agent channels servicing folks, it's going to have risk, it's going to have regulatory. Like my space is super highly regulated. It's going to have cyber security. There's these launch messages are amazing because it's like all these people were involved, and that's actually something we're super proud of. It's like, look at high five, and also we worked with this team over here and this horizontal team over there, and we have this shared victory. So I think that promotes this idea that we all own this big goal that we're trying to do for the company.
Yeah, love that.
You mentioned about the key result as a business drivers. When you set the OKRs, do you co-own it with your product partner, or how do you align if you are following any kind of a OKR?
It's an interesting question. In my team particularly, there's the business OKRs, which are to have an impact on customers, revenue, et cetera. And then we have some of our own technical goals, and we've been moving some of our technical KRs to more of a KPI, because once you've gotten to kind of a green status, let's say you needed to reduce incidents. Let's just take that common example. So let's say you were having a lot of incidents and you were really having to figure out, why are we having them? Where are they coming from? And you probably have a KR around let's drive down incidents by a certain percentage quarter over quarter, something like that. But once you get a handle on it,
right,
and now you've got a stable system and a reliable system because you've invested in it, you're probably going to pay attention to something else. And that's where I think, okay, now this is really just a KPI. I'm still going to look at it in my monthly performance report that, the engineers come and they show me across all of our applications. How are we doing across these metrics? But we don't need to go through many charts. I just need to see that the trend on our incidents is steady and low. And then that's now, in my mind, a key performance indicator and less of a KR. So it's So some of those things that we would have held as separate OKRs, like product OKRs, tech OKRs, we're trying to kind of separate it into more like key performance indicators, and then the OKRs are the shared OKRs that we all have together.
I would say, so very much agree with that. That collective ownership of goals in general is better than cascaded individual accountability. In that if you have a high performing team, they're going to knock the metric out of the park. And so if product and tech are aligned together and everybody's kumbaya, boom, that's amazing. And that's what you should strive for, because that's like the best outcomes when you have that kind of collective ownership. Absent of that, you have to, again, be thoughtful about where the decomposition lies. And to Kathleen's point, is it really a key result? Is it really a KPI? Is it really just something, is it an SLA? Like, what are we managing towards, and making that something that, you can understand and you can execute against. But collectivity on these kinds of things eats individual accountability with a cascade for breakfast. But it's very hard to get that. So I don't want to be just an idealist. I get it, that's harder, but it's awesome.
Great. Thanks for sharing your deep insights and experience in this. So everybody, thanks Chad. Thanks Kathleen.